Oh, sleep. Nothing else could ever bring me such pleasure, such freedom, the power to feel and move and think and imagine, safe from the miseries of my waking consciousness.
Welcome to the Busy Girls Book Club and almost a happy new year. We are a podcast that rates and reviews Book Talks and Bookstagram's most recommended and popular books to tell you whether or not you should take the time out of your busy schedule to read them. I'm Catherine.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Caitlin. So today we are bringing you one that's been popular for a little while, and that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation. And basically, this 20-something-year-old woman who's rich and hot and privileged decides that she wants to sleep for an entire year. And with the aid of a crazy psychiatrist, she takes enough pills to try and make it happen. And it's kind of a whole year in this girl's life and what happens in her few moments of consciousness. Yeah, I really don't know how else to describe this book.
You got it.
You can probably guess from
that
my
does the
tone
job. That does the
that I
job.
am about this book. You guys have reviews.
Yes, I have a review. It's a 1-star review. And let me just say, the 1-star reviews were great for this book.
They were good.
I really felt them. So this is a 1-star review that says, American Psycho, but the grisly murders have been replaced with a series of naps.
Yep, that's a good one. I had that one on my list.
Here's a 3-star. She sure did love Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
An unhealthy obsession with Whoopi Goldberg surrounded by an unhealthy person.
Yeah. The Whoopi Goldberg part was actually one of the weirder parts that I was just like,
yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Okay, I have several. I have several short 1-stars, and then I have a 3-star that actually represents my opinion, but it's a little bit longer. So, okay, first 1-star. Half of the time, this felt like reading Carrie Bradshaw experiencing a depressive episode.
Yes.
Which I actually felt was extremely accurate. Another similar one, which is actually 2-star. I can't stop seeing the protagonist as Serena van der Woodsen. Help.
Yes.
I said also yes. Okay, then here's the longer one. It's a 3-star review. This is a very accurate depiction of depression. You feel the main character's monotony, lethargy, and pointlessness of it all. As someone who copes with depression by sleeping an excessive amount, I understood where she was coming from and picked up this book out of curiosity to see what happens when someone submits to the nihilistic desire to not associate with the world anymore. Unfortunately, there were a lot of missed opportunities for the story to be more insightful and memorable beyond the exaggerated experiment of taking a mental health day. Many reviews complain that the main character is deplorable and annoyingly privileged, but I argue that was on purpose. The fault is more so that there wasn't much done with this purposeful portrayal. I think showing more vulnerability to her character would have added more insight, especially since she was clearly grieving her parents and projecting her self-hatred onto her best friend. But there was little payoff for these subplots. The middle part drags, which makes a tonal shift and tacked on conclusion towards the end, in contrast, feel too abrupt and heavy-handed. So anyway, I think that's just kind of a good summary of the book in general.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Well, this is actually like a fairly well reviewed book for being such a strange plot and idea. The overall Goodreads review is 3.6 out of 5, and the overall Amazon rating is 4 out of 5. I've seen this book talked about a lot all over the internet. Where did you guys come down?
I want to hear from Caitlin first.
I know.
Do you?
Yes.
At first, I gave this 2 stars. And then I was like, no, I really hated this book. And I saw the other 1 star I had given all year was Bunny, and I said, yes, that's correct. So 1 star from me because I don't. I'm sorry, I'm not a lit fic girly. I don't know what I was supposed to get from this. I super hated the main character and the random grotesque things that were included about like dead dogs and stuff. And the ending, like what the actual hell? Um, yeah, I gained nothing from reading this. That's pretty much I see what it was supposed to do. For me, it did not do it.
Yeah. I actually had a very similar experience. I originally gave this 3 stars because I could see where the author was going, and I did enjoy parts of the book. Just, well, not enjoy. Enjoy is the wrong word, but I appreciated parts of the book. But then I was like thinking about it after reading it. And this is the first time I've ever done this. I went back and saw what I rated Tender as the Flesh, and I purposely made it this one lower because Tender as the Flesh was grotesque, but it had a purpose to it. And there was something I took out of it, and I still think about that book to this day and what it was trying to get at. I don't see myself ever thinking about this book again, except for in like the back of my mind saying, oh, probably the worst book I read this year. So I gave it 2 stars. Didn't quite hit the 1 star level because I've read some pretty shitty books before. But I could be made an argument for 1 star as well.
So I gave it 4 stars.
Yeah, there it is.
I did like it. I do think like there are lots of relevant critiques of the book. It's sort of like almost like a the women review where like I did like it, but I also have like very significant issues with it. Um, I respected it and I actually did find it really interesting. Like I didn't hate the main character as much as other people, I think. Even though she's like clearly a privileged and annoying person. I also think that she has actually a really bad life, and that's part of why she's doing this. Um, and I think the point of the book is just like the absurdity and pointlessness of life. And it's like those books don't really have a payoff, right? Like the whole point of the plot is just to be like, none of this matters, and that's what life is like. And so I'm like there with it, right? Like I'm one of the people who kind of enjoys a book like that. So I'm already like predisposed to like this book more than other people because that's just like a very specific type of like artistic genre. Um, However, I don't think she fully landed the plane, if that makes sense. Like I think a lot of the right
that's
there
a
are
really
jokes to be
bad
made there.
I accidentally made just a really terrible book, terrible joke. I did not mean it like that. For those of you who are confused, 9/11 makes an appearance in this, so that was not
that was
to be a 9/11 joke.
Sick.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, that wasn't. That was.
I got it immediately. I was like, oh no, Casey.
Catherine and I's faces were both like, oh.
Sorry, I'll rephrase. I don't think she totally accomplished what she was going for.
No.
And I think that a lot of the elements of a really interesting book and a really like sort of poignant message was there. And I just don't think she really managed to like tie everything together. There are parts of the book that just felt a little random, like, and I mean that in they were weird, but they never really connected to any other parts of the plot. They never really became important in any kind of way that you would want to see. There wasn't really, it wasn't absurd in the sense that like it didn't mean anything. It felt like it was absurd in the sense that it was supposed to mean something and then it didn't. And then the ending was just really bizarre and I don't think achieved anything in the context of like the journey that we were taking on. And so yeah, that was really long. I did enjoy the book. I actually enjoyed reading the experiment that she was doing, but I think as a novel, like the story was not fully doing what it was supposed to.
Yeah. I think the ending's just way too abrupt and it leaves you with a weird taste in your mouth where it's just kind of like this ending feels like it has nothing to do with what we have been talking about this entire time.
If there had been a little more clear, like, this is what I took away from the experiment kind of thing at the end, I might have liked it more. But
yeah, Because I could see where it was going at the end when she
Hmm.
kind of concluded her experiment, and there was moments where she had some clarity and some mental uh, reflection, but then it just kind of ends, and you're like, well, what now?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
At the end, the
do.
character is still a shitty person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think like the point is that it doesn't make sense and the point is that you don't explain it. My real issue is that I just felt like it felt thematically tangential to like all the other themes in the book. Like it just didn't the message and like the experience the character was going through, it just didn't connect to anything else the book was about, really. And I like looked up super long Reddit threads about this book because I just needed to like know what other people were making of it all. And there are people who argue that it does, but I would argue that it doesn't. And so anyway.
So
Okay.
here's a fun question. Is this book more plot or character driven?
I mean, it's character driven. It's one
Character.
character.
Yeah.
Have you thought about it though? We never learned the character's name.
Yes, that is
Mhm.
one of my
I
questions.
have thought about that. I have.
So it's a character driven book and we don't even know the
Yeah.
character's name.
Just protagonist.
Like Fleabag.
Hmm.
See, it's
Um,
already art above my threshold of enjoyment, so
okay. Have you or would you read other books by the author?
I don't think I will, and I haven't.
I saw
Sorry.
some reviews saying they like her book Eileen, but it's gonna be a no from me.
I've also seen about her book Lap Nova. Um, I would read another book by her, but I'm also not like raring to do so. But I think if like another book of hers like broke through the noise and people were talking about it, I would be down to check it out.
Um,
Um,
what about the pacing and how long did it take you to read? Because it looks short. It does.
Because it
Short
technically
little.
is. It
mhm.
technically is short, which is shocking. Because like the first chapter gets you 26% into the book. Like I was shocked when I
Oh,
finished chapter one and I was like,
yeah.
26%.
Yeah, so there's my main issue is I read the physical copy and there was 8 chapters in the book and it's super long. And so there's like, and a lot of it's stream of consciousness and pages that are whole paragraphs and continue on to other pages. So there was like no starting and stopping points for this book that made sense, which angered me because I wanted to stop.
Yes.
um, it took me like 5 days to read,
The
and that was
pacing's
forced.
the pacing's atrocious. Like I'll just say it. It's atrocious. It's stream of consciousness. It's a diseased person's thinking, which I get that's what the author wanted. And I get it. I get it. But it took me 11 days to read and I wouldn't have finished it if we didn't have this podcast. So,
There. I liked the pacing. It was well paced. I just read it and read it and read it and read it. Like I never really wanted to put it down, but I was like very intrigued by like where the experiment was going and like
I
what was
think if you
ultimately.
are going to read it, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. And I found it really easy to read. So I think it still took me several days to read it, but that was more of just like my personal lifetime constraints. I probably would have sat down and read this book in one sitting, to be honest, because it's just flip, flip, flip. What's happening next? What's happening next? What's happening next?
yeah. But
Uh,
for the purposes of this podcast, we are busy girls. This is
Yeah.
not easy to read as a busy girl because it is stream of consciousness.
I think it is. I picked it up and put it down, no problem. Like I just blew through it. I think it took me 3 days, and it would have taken me shorter.
Okay.
We're all different
um,
readers here.
yeah. Um, would you watch a movie or TV show of this
No,
book?
Fuck
no,
no.
no.
I can genuinely not imagine what a movie of this book would even be like. I can see someone attempting it actually. I feel like some weird art house student might make an attempt at it.
Sure.
Um, but there's just so little that actually happens. I can't imagine really wanting to
What
see it.
I really want is to see the movie that Ping Ji was making in the
Yeah,
end. That's all I'm interested in.
right.
Also, I don't care.
Okay. Well, now we're at our busy girl rating.
I mean, I'm going to give it a 2. I don't see the point and I don't see the pacing in this book. I just, 8 chapters for like 268 pages, and it jumps around. And I felt when I was putting it down, I didn't want to pick it back up. But when I did pick it back up, I still was lost in the sauce. So, no.
I'm torn between a 2 and a 3 because it's not like writing wise hard to read. And a lot of people do enjoy it, but am I personally recommending it to anyone? No. Did I personally enjoy the pacing? No. So I think I'm going to lean a 2.
Fair. I'm going to give it a 3. So I am going to bump it down for my quality rating. I think it's really easy to read and I think it's a quick read. So I think why not? But I do think it's sort of a niche type of reader who would like this. Like, I think the fact that the reviews are so high actually say a lot for the branding of the book because I feel like this book, like, found the right readers, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. And actually, the book is so depressing that I think you have to be careful when you read it. Like, I did wish at certain points that I was not reading this book during the month of December, because it's just a dark and depressing time of year.
Yeah, so I've seen this book lots of places, never read it was about. And so we were like, oh, we should do My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I was like, oh, what a lovely way to end the year. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's my
I go into a lot of these without reading summaries,
Yeah.
and I really should start reading.
That is completely my B because I also did that. And I was the one that scheduled this book because I was like, oh, perfect way to end the year because the title. This book was neither relaxing nor a good thing to read at the end of the year. Like, this is the most probably stressful time of year for anyone, but especially like journalists and people who are busy and have family to go to and Christmas presents to shop for. It's a stressful time of the year. And I was not mentally ready for this book.
Yeah. So I am going to knock it down partly just because I think if you want to read this book, you should take our advice and choose your moment.
I'll probably read it by like the pool in June.
Yeah. I think it would be kind of a fascinating beach read, actually, because you're like, I don't know. Okay. So now we're at our spoiler alert section. And we get to talk about what this character has done to herself for a year. And all the crazy shit that she gets into. Most of it while she's not conscious. Okay. So decide if you want to read this book or just come along for the ride anyway.
I would say just listen through so you never have to read it.
Yeah. I agree with that statement.
All right. Anyway, first question up is what did you think of the narrator and her escape from the world via drugs and sleep? Also, we never learn her name. She never really has a firm identity outside of what we learn via her consciousness.
Yeah, that reminds me of that like TikTok sound of like trust fund 6'5" blue eyes. Because like she's just blonde hair lady who sleeps. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because it's first person narrator and the people around her are extremely self-absorbed. So they're not saying her name or they're not saying like, they're not thinking about her. They're not telling her like, are you okay? They're not checking in on her. Like she has shitty boyfriends. She kind of has a shitty best friend, but she's also very shitty to her best friend. So you're just kind of like left with, okay, here are her descriptors. She's a super, super thin, rich kid who has the level of privilege to just quit her job and sleep for a year.
Yeah. So I think I have sort of an uncommon take on this question. And I think this is one of the main things that separates people from who liked the book and who didn't like the book. Because I actually felt really bad for the main character. Like, yes, she is like objectively a bad person. And also, you're right, Catherine, like everyone around her is also like kind of objectively a bad person. But the reason I kind of felt for her is that she had terrible parents, she had a bad home life, and I think my favorite part of the book is you can really see how that trauma resulted in like who she is, and especially her relationship with her best friend, who's a big part of the book. I was like, because her like neglect from her parents turned her into a very avoidant person. And then her best friend was a super anxious person. So like her friend clings on to her despite like multiple rejections. And like she cannot give her affirmation because she's so like avoidant of a person. And then that dynamic also shows up with her only sexual relationship, who is like the worst person in the whole book. And so she recreates that like cycle of like neglect and abandonment, like in her relationships. Because also, even though this friend is super needy, she doesn't actually care about her in any real or meaningful way. She wants to be her friend because she knows that the main character has a certain amount of status just because she's pretty and wealthy. So there are all these like vapid relationships that I would personally define as like examples of self harm, like the way that
Mhm.
you choose people as punishment to yourself. Um, and so I actually felt really bad for her just because she's clearly like very damaged and coping in the worst ways possible. Um, Also, I think most people have experienced at least one period of their life where they felt like this, where you feel so just like overwhelmed and sad that you just wish you could like fast forward. And
Yeah.
so like that's why I partly related to the review I read is I was like there have been times where I was just like I just wish I could just like fast forward to the end of this like really stressful period of my life. So anyway, I was really interested in just seeing what it might actually look like for someone to literally do it, to literally fast forward through their life. Um, so even though yes, like I agree that she's a bad person, I was actually interested in her. Um, and so yeah.
I mean, yeah, I felt bad for her. Don't get me wrong, because I think you can see the diseased thinking and how it was
Mhm.
inherited, and that her mother showed her this example of just sleeping
Yeah.
through life, drugging yourself through life,
Yep.
boozing
Like the
yourself up.
example was set for her. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do feel sorry for her, but I also felt sorry for me for having to experience her. And then by about the 56% mark, I was like, can we just get this over with? Can you just die? I'm sorry, but can you just not?
Oh Lord.
Yeah,
Okay,
no, that's
so
very dark. Sorry.
here's a very transparent review of why I probably don't like her is because one of like I'm medicated for anxiety depression, and one of the ways I unhealthily cope with things is I take naps. If there is
Yep.
too much going on, I just shut down and take a nap. So like I get it. I get
Mhm.
her. I get why she's doing what she's doing. However, like to get to a place that far gone, I don't know. I just she was a lot. She was very self-absorbed, and I mean, I guess part of it she didn't have a lot of people in her life to live for. Like, um, I don't know. I
Yeah.
just she was unlikable, even though I understood why she was doing what she was doing. And yeah. So, and kind of leading into the next question, like the themes of grief and depression and mental health, like the fact that she was so deep into pills and never accidentally OD'd and killed herself in that year is wild, first of all.
Mhm.
Um, the way they were just the way she described popping those pills, I was like, wow. The fact that she's still alive, incredible.
But not
But
remembering days on end.
right, like what a such an unhealthy way to go about this mission, and definitely people who struggle in this department should probably not read this book, but it was a accurate kind of picture of wanting to dissociate from a life that is lacking joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you, Caitlin. And I want to say something as well. I'm also on medication for anxiety. And uh, I hope, I hoped in this book that there would be an actual conversation about safely medicating because there was no one around. Like, I feel like taking, if you read this book and you've never experienced or been around someone who has dealt with a mental health issue and is correctly taking as prescribed their medication, I feel like you would come out of this book and say, fuck all medication. This is like, you shouldn't be medicating to get through life. And I'm like, no, there are people that they need this to help them get through day-to-day life and function as a person in society. And I get where the author is going with this, but it kind of felt like a personal attack at times because I do experience some mental health issues, and I actually advocate for getting help and going to therapy and going to see people and seeing a psychiatrist that can truly get you into the right headspace.
Do you want to hear something wild? I started counseling the week before I read this book.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's not good.
I was like, well, this is just quite the timing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I disagree. I don't think anyone reads this book and the message is like, don't take medication, because the whole plot was like purposefully absurd and taken to such an extreme that it's like very deliberate. And also, she wasn't taking them to take care of herself. She was taking them to deliberately not take care of herself. Like, it's very clear that what she's doing is like so destructive. And she had to go to like a fake therapist to even achieve this. Like, no real doctor would have ever allowed her to do this. And yeah, and I don't know, I did relate to it because, again, it was like, instead of being a functional human, you like cave to that inner desire to just escape. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I kind of liked it. I mean, it's not like a mental health book. Like, you would never read this book to be like, let's learn about depression, because she doesn't actually like deal with anything that she's feeling. But that's the point, is like, she just tries to like excavate emotion from her own brain, but she can't do it, which ends up coming up later because she takes these crazy pills and then like does things while she's on the pills. And so it's like her mind is still wanting her to function, even though she's trying to not function.
No, it's definitely a satirical take on mental health and the desire to just unplug. And I mean, it's interesting because it's based in the year 2000. So you're also not quite as plugged into the internet and things. So it's even
VHS
more interesting.
tapes.
Yeah, the VHS.
Okay, but it is interesting because our generation has been raised around, you know, this woman's kind of how she's been raised. And I think all kind of millennial Gen Z have the desire at some point to just totally unplug because it gets too loud.
Yeah. I want to talk about the year. I think that we have that question in here later. Yeah. But since you brought it up, I thought the decision to put it in 2000 was super weird. And it's really obvious very early on that the only real reason you would do that is if you want to bring in 9/11 in some way.
Yep.
And so it was looming there the whole time. You knew it was coming.
I knew what was happening the whole fucking time.
The whole book, you're sort of waiting for 9/11 and like waiting to see how this somehow connects to the author and what is happening.
I was like, oh, she's going to wake up and the towers are going to fall. Awesome.
Yeah. And then also her best friend, like quote unquote best friend, gets transferred to the towers. So the whole time it like has this presence in the book that you're just waiting to see what actually happens there. Like, obviously, we know what happens on 9/11, but how does this connect to the plot and to the characters? And I just thought it was super anxious. Yeah, I thought it was just like super disappointing and like weird and like felt like she went out of her way to make it about 9/11 when it didn't really have to be about 9/11. And also just like, this is the point in the book where I was really like, oh, I think this is just kind of fallen apart. Yeah. Which is that it's at the very, very end. It's just thrown in. And like the message the main character takes from this is just kind of like, life is beautiful because you have to live in the present. And I was just like, what?
Yeah. Lost in the sauce.
Yeah.
And it'd be like, okay, maybe if this book was written in like 2004 or something, but it's not. It's written in 2018.
Yeah. And it felt just like it felt like the only reason the author wanted it to be based in 2000 was for 9/11.
Yeah, which gave me the ick.
Yeah, it just felt like, why?
You know what it kind of reminded me of? A creative writing prompt where they give you a photo and you have to write an entire like essay or
Oh
novel
my
based
God,
off a
that's literally
photo.
what this book was.
And
Yeah.
the ending is the photo of like we've all seen this photo because we've had to like dissect it for history classes. It's a
Mhm.
photo of a woman jumping off of the Twin Towers and falling to her death because she couldn't escape.
Yeah, she made
Um,
her choice.
she made her choice. And she says, like in the book, it's like, we're not sure that this is Riva, but it's so beautiful. And then it just kind of ends. And you're just like, did you just do a creative writing prompt just for this photo?
Yeah. It's so bizarre to me and also felt unnecessary. And also, I felt like it almost like weakened the whole point of the book
Hmm.
because
It
something
did.
that is so effective in like creating that feeling of like overwhelm is social media. And there's no social media in the book. I was like, the fact that we're so technologically connected and like constantly berated with like messaging, ads, like text messages, people reaching out, people posting, people creating this idea of their life online, which is like really idealized and it makes people feel bad and self-conscious. Like I felt like all of that actually would have fit really well in the book, but
Hmm.
because she wanted so badly to put the book in 2000, it is not in it. And I was just like, I just don't get it.
Well, and
It
kind
could
of
have.
you get to where you're like, oh, she woke up and kind of rediscovered herself in the simplicity of being alive and has sort of overcome her issue, whatever it was. And then the only person in the world who cares that she's alive dies in a terrorist attack. The end.
Yeah.
So like what was the point?
Yeah.
Like it's the last time she said, I love you to Riva. Oh, yeah. Riva was in the Twin Towers. And I was just kind of like, what's the point of this? Like, I get that life moves on and that sometimes like terrible things happen to people and that like you can't predict the future and you can't predict when you die. But that didn't feel like that was supposed to be the message of
No.
this book.
Realistically,
Like,
no one would have been like, this was beautiful. They would have been like, I slept a year to get away from all the shit in my life and woke up and it got shittier.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's
Well, and I think to your point, Casey, I think it would be great if they set this book around the like years after Facebook was created
Hmm.
because we didn't truly know the impact of social media on mental health until
Mhm.
recently, really. And it was our generation that learned most of this shit because we started on Instagram when we were like 12.
Yeah.
Caitlin was older. But
I was gonna
Casey,
say, ouch.
yeah, sorry, Caitlin. But like Casey and I started in probably like middle school or early high school, which is like Facebook and Instagram and all these things. And then suddenly the studies start rolling in of like, oh, teenagers are even more depressed. They're more suicidal. They're struggling a lot because despite the overwhelming connection, you're feeling even more isolated. And so if she had said it around the time of like, she's a 25-year-old in 2012, 2011, or 2013, right when like kind of those social media apps start popping up, it would have been a more interesting novel.
Now, thought exercise. This book, but during the COVID pandemic.
Oh, Jesus.
That that would be more
The
interesting.
fact the fact that this book was written before the COVID pandemic and then the COVID
Yes.
pandemic happens, crazy to me.
It's actually wild to me because I feel like she actually, in a weird way, like predicted what COVID was like. Because COVID had
Yeah.
this feeling of like
Yeah.
isolation and like you're by yourself and you just kind of wish you could like
Like
skip
we
this
missed a whole year of our
part.
lives.
Right. Like we just
Bed
have this
rot.
chunk of time where we're not doing anything and it feels like it was sort of just like lost time. And so it's weirdly like eerily predictive.
That's probably why I hated it so much. It like brought up some memories.
Yeah,
Repressed trauma.
it did. It reminded me of COVID, of what it's like to just be in an apartment and you're just there.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Well, our next question is about the relationships in the book, which are all kind of fucked up in their own ways. The main ones are like the character's parents, the drugged out mom who basically does the same thing this character is doing to get through life, and then a totally absentee dad. Um, her Trevor, who is her like romantic relationship, who is really horrible to her. And then Riva, who is this her like quote unquote best friend who really likes her for status and who's obsessed with being beautiful and kind of with like materialism and looking and feeling a certain way and being popular. So, what did you guys think of all these people? Did you guys have a favorite person in the book?
My favorite person was the doctor.
Oh,
Yeah.
also the doctor, who was
That
Love
was
crazy.
the
Dr. Tuttle.
wildest character. But like emotionally connected, which didn't really happen in this book in general, but like I felt for Riva. I felt bad for her. Um, and how she had no one to lean on except this drugged out woman who didn't want her there. And she kept saying, I love you, despite all of that. And I feel like on some level, she did care about more than her status just because it was easy to be friends with the main character. It was easy to just, come by, drink some alcohol in her presence, not feel judgment, and then head out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was more there. And I think at the end, the character kind of gets to that point of like, oh, maybe I did care for Riva more than I thought. But she's
Yeah.
like truly terrible to Riva for most of the book, which kind of makes you hate the main character because it shows what a terrible person she is.
Yeah, but Riva's also extremely
Oh,
self-centered.
yeah.
Yeah.
And she's using the main character as her own personal shrink because the main character is so disassociated from life that she can't really give advice or comebacks or any sort of like rebuttal to anything. So she's just there to like be a warm body to talk to. So Reva's just using her as like the non-talkback therapist.
Sure, but the
And
main character is so horrible that you actually feel bad for Riva.
yeah,
You know what's interesting is I actually really didn't feel bad for Riva because I I have like a very similar thoughts about Riva than I did to the main character, where like I see her redeeming qualities, but I also see that she's a bad person. Like she, on one hand, she's there for her friend, even when her friend's trying really hard to push her away, which I admire. And I think a lot of people who are really struggling with mental illness need that. Um, Also, though, I don't think her intentions were necessarily that good. I think she just had no one else and was like, well, I want to talk. Like, well, I need
No, she
company
was
right
an
now.
enabler.
Right. She was a total enabler. And she also, I think the foil is interesting because her and the main character had really similar problems and then dealt with them in very different ways. Like Riva's eating disorder and her alcoholism. I felt like the author was just kind of pointing out, right? Like mental illness displays itself in different ways. And like Riva was just so obsessed with like materials and fitting in as basically an expression of her anxiety and depression, of like not having any self confidence, having out these relationships with are really destructive and not genuine. Um, and I just like did feel so like annoyed with her sometimes because I was just like, you're just it did feel like she was condescending. Like she felt like she was better than people because she committed to this idea that society held up, even though underneath it she had all of the same problems. Um, and
I mean, every person's unhappy in the book.
yeah, like deeply unhappy. Um, and then it feels like as soon as the narrator gives her what she wants, like becomes more invested and more present in the relationship, she's the one who becomes absent. Um, and so it's a really complicated relationship, but ultimately I also just felt like she didn't like she just wasn't a friend. And so I don't think that you owe a bad friend good friendship. Not that this not that anything either character did was correct.
yeah, I agree. I mean, they're both bad people. I mean, but they're both diseased people because she's
Yeah.
struggling with an eating disorder, and eating disorders can really screw up your mental health and how you perceive people
Mm-hmm.
because you're seeing yourself as less than or as not skinny enough to other people. So I
Well,
felt bad for her because of that.
And you get enough background that you know they're both products of their upbringing.
Yeah.
So we talked about how the main character's mom is drugged and alcoholed out most of her time, not living the life that she wanted to live, and ultimately that did send her to her grave. And then the dad was just kind of like there but not there. So while she had a good childhood, like on, if you're just tallying things up, she didn't have like a happy upbringing. And then Reva comes from like a small suburban town, was the strange girl in high school and now desperately wants to fit into the New York culture. So you see how like both of their upbringings lead to their issues. And it is interesting that we get the backstory kind of for both of them, but
Yeah.
doesn't make it any less depressing.
Right. Um, okay. So then the main character for most of this time, she's sort of knocking herself out. She's having weird dreams, but nothing else is really going on. But she's convinced, like, her consciousness is still too pervasive. Like, she's trying to numb herself to the degree that she, like, legitimately, like, does not have thoughts and emotions anymore. And so then the book takes this sort of turn when she gets on this new medication that does like truly knock her out. But then she does all this stuff while she's knocked out and it's not really safe. And then she like doesn't, it's disconcerting because she doesn't know what she's done for sure when she's asleep.
Well, and she's like, am I asleep then if I'm doing all this stuff? That's a waste of my energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it becomes this almost like
Existential question.
existential question of like what is like asleep. But anyway, so to deal with that, then she becomes friends with Ping Yi. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but it's this artist who does this really fucked up like meta art that is like kind of bullshit, but it's just like to be it's sort of like the author commenting on her own book because it's just art.
I was
just
gonna say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, literally, this book is those stuffed fucking dogs.
Yeah. So it's sort of, I think that's kind of funny, right? It's like the author making fun of herself because she does the same kind of thing. Um, anyway, she enlists this crazy artist's help to keep her knocked out for the rest of her time because she can't safely be on this medication unless she's locked inside her apartment. But then she has the problem of like, how do I get food? How do I make sure I'm taken care of and not dead? So she enlists his help and they do this weird experiment where he can use her in his art while she's like conked out on this medication and he makes sure that she's fed and safe. What did you guys think of this development?
I mean, I hate to say that's better than Trevor because she's still being used. Her body is being used kind of without her conscious awareness or knowledge, even though she agrees to the experiment. She's only agreeing to it because she needs a quote unquote jailer. And he was the only one who would do it and wouldn't like send her to a psych ward because he's getting something out of it. So it felt very much like she was pimping herself out. And like some of the worst moments were like were with Trevor because like she just like woke up from her Infinerol or something, the medication haze to his like dick in her mouth. And that's like horrifying because that's sexual assault. That is rape because she was
invited
not
him over.
Yes, but she's not conscious.
No.
Yeah. But
So
also
no.
she sort of is conscious. It's like
Right.
like
But
how do you
Yeah.
I don't know. He's like a rapist and horrible anyway.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
but-
Maybe I would have thought more about the ping sheet thing if they hadn't started the book with him freezing dogs to death and like ejaculating art. And so I had no desire for this man to be present in this book at all. I thought coming up with those ideas of art were so gratuitous. I hated them. And then she like shits in on the floor in front of the dogs. I'm like, what stuff that's like you're already doing this crazy experimental book. Do you really need to add this random horrific shit in it? Anyway, I don't know. I was kind of like, yeah, this is about what you deserve at this point if you're gonna be this far gone. So
So this is where the book started to lose me. Um, I agree. I didn't like Ping all the art gallery stuff. I just didn't really get the point of it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, maybe to show that she's like, having a mental health crisis and like is coping poorly, but I just didn't think any of it really needed to be in the book. I don't think it
No.
had like a great purpose or like informed us really about the characters in any way. And so I didn't really like the art gallery part, which is more in the beginning when she decides to like cut herself off from society. And then I didn't really like when she does the whole like pingy experiment thing. Because to me, like the interesting part of her earlier experiment is that her consciousness is like fighting back. And that's kind of interesting to me because it's like, even if you try to numb yourself to an extreme degree, like you can never take the human out of you, right? Like you'll always have emotions. You'll always want things. You'll always want other people and need other people. And so I thought that was like sort of interesting that like even as she's like desperately trying to like dehuman herself, her like consciousness actually is like fighting back against her and she's realizing that she can never make herself the blank slate that she
So
wants
it's,
to
in
be.
my opinion, the only interesting point of the book.
Yeah, I thought that was good. But then when she does this experiment with Ping Yi, it like totally like just smooths it over. It felt almost too easy.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that just let out also a lot of the tension because there's not really plot, but the tension comes from like what's happening to her. She doesn't fully know when she's conscious and not conscious. She doesn't have full control of this experiment, right? Like those things are interesting.
It
And
felt like
then
a way to write over the last 3 or 4 months of her experiment without having to like write what she
exactly.
was thinking.
Yes.
It felt
Yeah.
like a cop out to me.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, and it kind of then reverses all the other, like the point of everything else that we just read. And so I was like, I don't know. I didn't think it was super interesting. I thought it was too easy and it didn't really serve the book.
It felt like, yeah, a cop out to get to 9/11 and to get to
Yeah.
September and to get to her healed, quote unquote, person
Mhm.
out of her year of rest and relaxation.
Let's talk about that. So when she wakes up, she stumbles downstairs and can't even stand, and the doorman's like, "Where the hell have you been?" She starts to reintegrate herself. She buys a cell phone. She starts to venture further into the city and just kind of re-engage. But she's like an observer. She's still not plugged into society, but she's like a NPC in society. She like feeds the birds on the bench and watches people. And you think, wow, nice of her to be present. But is she healed? Is she changed?
Probably not. I
Yeah.
mean,
No.
she's because she says she's reintegrating into society, but she's not really. She's watching it from afar, just from a different location. She's outside now. I'm outside looking at people and feeding ducks. Like that's the only thing she does is interactions feeding ducks. So she's not truly healed. I mean, like you can't heal yourself through copious amounts of drugs and sleep. Like that's just not how that works. I mean, there are moments of self reflection in her ending chapters where she's like, okay, I don't want to kill myself anymore, which is nice. And she's starting to appreciate Riva more and recognize that, like, maybe I do need this friend. Maybe I do need this person. Maybe I should appreciate this person. And then it just ends with Riva dying in the Twin Towers. So it's just kind of like, huh? Like, you went through this quote unquote journey just to end the journey without herself.
I think that's largely why this book is so dissatisfying, is because the character is not changed at the end. It's a journey of, I don't know, self-discovery, healing, etc., etc., and none of that actually happens. So you're kind of like, why did I just read this bizarre book when the moral of the story is you can't sleep away your problems?
Yeah. I agree. I was very disappointed with the reintroduction to society part of the book. And at first I was kind of into it because I was like, okay, She's taking it slow. That kind of makes sense, right? Um, but I feel like we don't get to the point that's realistic, which is where she then actually has to move forward
Mhm.
because her money isn't going to last forever. She does need to work eventually. And, no man is an island. You can't live in a satisfying life without any friends or meaningful connections. And also, all the traumas that existed before still exist. So, like, eventually, the pain of your parents' death, of having a very unsatisfying romantic relationship that was really abusive and predatory, will still come back. And it seemed like she did succeed in keeping those things at bay. And she learned to appreciate life in the present more, which I was like, good. I think that could totally happen. But then it felt like there was like an and then that was missing.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't like the ending having to do with 9/11. I've read multiple explanations of it. I don't think it really makes sense.
No. It
And
was
if the,
disaster porn. It was not
yeah, I
useful.
mean, I don't even know if it's disaster porn because we just don't even connect to it. It's just like, oh, this
No.
happened.
There's no conclusion.
Yeah, it was just like, and I don't think it needs to conclude. Like in an absurdist book where the point is that life is pointless, there's still kind of like an artful but unsatisfying ending. But I just don't think this even hit that note. Like it didn't even hit that.
Well, and the people that are reading this book were barely alive for 9/11. Like, I was in kindergarten. Y'all weren't even looking at the TV. Like the
Yeah,
target
that's funny.
audience isn't as, yes, we are emotionally connected to the event that happened, but not in the same way the generation before us is. Like they watched it on TV, they remember it. And I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to end it there too, because like, are we feeling the things we are supposed to feel? I don't know.
Right. It's very up to interpretation, but in a way that feels like there's not a lot of room to interpret it.
The only interpretation I want is that Trevor also died in the towers.
No, he was on his honeymoon. It said that.
Yeah,
Oh,
he
damn
didn't
it.
die. He didn't die.
So
And that
that's
was actually
also,
that was a part I actually liked because the point is really clear that like good things and bad things don't have anything to do with what kind of person you are, which I think is totally fair. That's life. But then it was like, but what about the main character? What
right.
happens to her? We
She's
don't
still
know.
on a bench feeding ducks.
Yeah, she's just like almost like borderline like mentally um what do they call it when your brain is dead but your body is still alive?
Brain dead?
Brain dead. There we go. But it just felt like there should have been a little bit more to the resolution of the experiment.
Yes. It left
Yeah.
it left readers wanting.
Yeah. Um, okay. Well.
Well,
Anything else y'all
indeed.
want to say? I don't even know. I think that's it.
No, I'm good. I'm done.
Yeah, same. Let's move on from this book and look at books to recommend.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. I should have. What do I want to recommend?
I'm gonna recommend The Secret History, which I somehow liked more. I don't know.
More of a
It's
plot,
the
Damn.
to be
same
fair.
strange, pointless thought experiment kind of thing. Um, I felt like I felt similarly reading both of them. Very stream of consciousness, very, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to get from this. Um, some moral questions with no answers and an unsatisfying ending. But there are people who like this genre. So if you liked this book, you probably will like that one.
If you like more deeper dives into suicidal ideation and mental health, I think that one of the classics of this century is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. She does a very fantastic job of diving into depression and suicide. I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, obviously. The whole book is about suicide. Um, but I think if you want to read a book that is what this book was trying to tackle and does it better, The Bell Jar.
I would also say A Little Life does it better.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also
But
unsatisfying, but
and also takes a month longer.
Yes.
Uh,
um,
but yeah.
I do agree with that. I think that's a good recommendation, both of you. I am going to recommend a book called Night Bitch, which I've recommended before, but we will never read on this podcast.
It's a
If you
movie now,
like,
guys. You can skip the book.
yeah, if you like sort of plotless, like thought experiments into mental illness, this is it. Night Bitch does it. But I think it does it much better than this book. I think it actually accomplishes the sort of artistic endeavor that it's trying to be on, and kind of it's just a more satisfying and better written version of this sort of thing. But it's about motherhood and sort of feeling unsatisfied in your life as a mother, and motherhood depression, and feeling like you give up a lot of yourself and you're like not supported by your husband, and also you love your child but your whole life is kind of held hostage by your child, and so it's like it's very good.
I personally went and immediately read Ali Hazelwood's holiday novella to purge this from my brain. If you need a 73-page rom-com to erase it, there's a good rec.
Ah,
um all right, well, these are our opinions. Obviously we had a lot of different ones on this book. But let us know what you want us to read. And you can do that at Busy Girls Pod. Um, yeah. Please rate and review this podcast 5 stars. Also.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. This is our final episode of 2024, I believe, if I'm looking at the calendar correctly. So get ready for another new year of the Busy Girls Book Club. I'm Caitlin.
I'm Casey.
and I'm Catherine. Thanks for listening. And when you get a chance, take a break with the Busy Girls Book Club.